welcome to the stage Juergen Maier, please. So Juergen, thanks very much for joining us. What I'm not going to do is do that thing that's here at events where I talk through your entire career, history, background, share all the funny anecdotes that I'm sure we're going to hear from you. So yeah, I just thought we could launch into it and kind of hear it from your own words. And I thought we'd start just at the beginning, really, and what it was like growing up as a lad before we launch into some more kind of detailed questions about career and stuff like that. Yeah, where do you kind of come from? What's your background?
Well, I suppose the name gives it away a little bit that there's an Austrian Germanic background there somewhere. So yeah, that's where life started in the southwest of Germany. Actually, my Austrian parents had moved from a lovely place in Austria to Germany to find work. Yeah, so that was the first 10 years of my life in a sort of a beautiful city called Karlsruhe, and a place where, you know, I mean, this would have been, you know, so I would have been 8, 9 in the early 70s, and you know, and as a young lad, aged 8 or 9, you could go with your friends on the tram, you know, get into the city centre, have an ice cream, and get on the tram and go home again. You know, it was that sort of a city, everything clean, beautiful, you know, pretty well behaved. And yeah, so that was that bit. And then my mother decided that her second husband, so I was brought up as by a single mother. My father had left sort of for new ventures quite early on. Yeah, and she decided to marry a Brit. Who she met on holiday, and so it was right. We're moving to England, and that was sort of, I remember it was pretty horrific actually. You know, I mean, you're sort of, by this time I was 10, you know, and you know, any 10-year-old, you've got your friends, you know, and you do your things, and you love your school and everything, you know, and it's right, you're moving to England, and it was right, my God, really, you know. But
so
there was
how
also
was that kind of transition from beautiful kind of, you know, alpine surrounds to Leeds.
Well, and the only two places I knew at that point was you know, the city I'd grown up in and Austria, because the only place we had holidays were in Austria. We're at grandparents in Austria, so every sort of summer and Christmas trip was always to Austria. So those were the only two places I knew. And then it was, right, we're coming to Leeds. And this was 1974, landing in Leeds. So I think we'll have to leave the Germany story there, and we talk a little bit about Leeds. And yeah, you know, there was a little bit of excitement about coming to Great Britain, and because, you know, it was clear that I had some interest in sort of engineering. My father was an engineer, my godfather was an engineer, my brother's a bit older than me, was into engineering, you know, and I don't know, I just thought of this great British engineering nation, and it's going to be, you know, this is going to be an amazing place, and Leeds must be fantastic. And yeah, well, you know, some of you may remember Leeds. It wasn't much different to Manchester, you know, in 1974. I mean, it was rough. And it was a shock, you know, it was a shock to the whole family. And, you know, my mother, who'd only visited Leeds a couple of times, and I think my stepfather was very clever and just took her from the airport and only took her to Harrogate and Wetherby, and and didn't actually show a Leeds city centre, you know. And when we arrived in this place, it was a shock. And because we were young lads, me and my brother, so you just get on with it. But I tell you, my mum to this day has never really got quite used to it, you know. She was always longing back to her sort of beautiful Germany and Austria. So yeah, so that was that. And then of course there is the sort of the, you know, the gay angle of the journey, which is, you know, so 74, late 70s, early 80s, you know, I think I was sort of, you know, certainly coming out to myself, probably age 15, 16, but, you know, starting to actually, you know, pick up the nerves to go down to the gay bars in Leeds, probably when I was about 17, 18. And it was those days, you know, you literally, you know, some of you in the room remember where you knocked on the door and you were let in or you weren't let in. And you know, and then, to be honest with you, the rest of that part of my life was a party, you know, it was good fun. Leeds was great fun. We had the warehouse club, which wasn't gay, but it sort of was gay. That was that. And then the rest of the story, I mean, we can keep it really short, and we can just say it's a sin. Who we've, there's nobody in the room that hasn't watched It's a Sin, I would imagine. And I think for anybody who was one of those sort of 80s kids, that was just an unbelievable production, I thought. And I'm not somebody who gets sort of teary in front of the television, but that was the one that really sort of brought the tears on, because that was my life in Leeds, which is on the one hand having a party and having the most amazing time and dancing and getting drunk and, all the things you do, and of course being a little bit promiscuous, and then you get, hit with this, this huge pandemic, which just put a stop to a lot of things, and then some of your friends, caught HIV and AIDS, some survived, some didn't, and it was a horrible time, yet, and I'm still not quite sure how we got through it, because it really was a horrible time. And actually, the other thing is when a lot of people, when we've just been through our COVID pandemic and moving on, and I'm sure many of you have said the same, everybody, this pandemic was terrible, never lived through it before. And I'm thinking, no, I have lived through a pandemic before. It's just it only affected, sort of 6 or 7% of us of the population. And because of that, it didn't get the attention and the support that it actually needed. So that was that story. And then I think we probably move on a little bit from. So what's your next question?
Well, I have so many questions about what Leeds sounded like back then, but I'm not going to go into that. So I guess it'd be great to hear just a little bit about how it was to come out. And of course, we're obviously forever coming out, aren't we? So in terms of coming out in Leeds and also thinking a little bit about work as well and coming out kind of professionally to colleagues.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I sort of had 4 sort of, official comings out. And they are weird moments, aren't they? And it's the same, I think, especially people who grew up in that time. I didn't come out to my family very early, so the first coming out is to your closest of friends, especially the ones you're sleeping with, when you were pretending to be bisexual, or whatever it was, or I'm just, having a go. And so that was the sort of the first coming out, and that was pretty young, that was sort of 16, 17, I would say, and that led to quite a party life, really. That was, like I say, mostly good fun, and then the next one was actually, the order was actually that I went to university first. So I went from Leeds to Nottingham Trent Polytechnic, as it was then, Nottingham Trent University now, and then I did, I made the mistake of not coming out straight away, so I was sort of slightly back into this. I'm not sure, I don't know these people, so I was closeted there. Apart from slowly coming out to a few friends, and then after that I did come out to my family.
How did that go?
Well, to my surprise, they were shocked.
Okay.
Normally your mothers know, don't they? But my mother really didn't know. And my stepdad didn't have a clue. But look, it wasn't one of those terrible moments, it was just a moment of, sort of shock and gosh, we didn't know, and, we thought you had a girlfriend, and, and I'd had girlfriends, and, but very supportive family. So that was all good. Yeah.
And then into the workplace, were you out when you
No, so this was the thing. And then I just sort of worked my way to being properly out at university and living, more of a, and I think, like, again, probably like a lot of people, I sort of had 2 crowds of friends, there was sort of my straight crowd, and there was my gay crowd. And that was quite enjoyable doing that, and it's sort of leading, not a double life, but it's definitely, you're applying sort of different behaviours in those 2 situations. Yeah, and then again I made the mistake of when I went to work, So I graduated and I went to work in Congleton in Cheshire.
Was that straight into Siemens? Or
And that was straight into Siemens, yeah. And I mean, this is quite a bizarre story because my father did work for Siemens. He went from Austria to Germany to work for Siemens. My mother went to get a job at Siemens. They sent me to a Siemens-sponsored school, primary school, which was sort of a technically based technical school, basically. And and then sort of a few years later, you end up starting work at Siemens, and so that's quite an interesting story. And then ended up working at Siemens for 33 years. So I moved to Congleton as a production engineer, and chose not to come out, and probably made the right decision, because Siemens, and like many engineering companies or many companies generally at that time, there was a very sort of, I think you call it alpha male type leadership, and to get on in this company, you needed to be a, pretty macho, the sort of the shouting type leader. And so what do you do? I mean, you're a totally junior person. You can't affect any change. You just think, look, that's what everybody's like around here. I'm going to be like that. And so, I genuinely spent 10 years, bringing the worst out in my leadership style, which was to be a bit of an alpha male, because, that's the way you got on in this company. And so I did the best I could, at sort of faking being an alpha male, brackets. I think I did show my difference, somewhat. But that's really how I sort of, if you like, played the game, and and it worked. I mean, not just because of my alpha male style, but generally, I was, working hard and enjoying working, and I ended up within a relatively short period of time. So I stayed in this factory for 10 years, and I ended up the boss of the factory at a fairly young age. Because I would have been 21 when I started there. So by 27, I was general manager. I think at 28, I was sort of the managing director of the site, which, I mean, really was quite, bizarre. I always remember the chief executive coming in. It was a factory that people were quite proud of. And so they'd all, and the chief executive would say, and this is Juergen, he's the managing director of the site. No, he really is the managing director of the site. By the way, I looked about 18. So, it was so.
I guess you had no idea at that time that you would be doing his job at some point later.
No, I didn't. No, absolutely no idea. No, absolutely. I was just enjoying what I was doing, and look, as a matter of fact, we were just somebody who's just joined Siemens in Congleton here, and you were just saying what a wonderful place it is to work, and it really was a wonderful place to work, and still is. So yeah, always enjoyed that.
So, at what point in your professional journey did you decide to come out, and what drove that decision? Yeah,
so I mean, I would sort of broadly put my Siemens career, it was 33 years, and I sort of put it into three phases. The first was the phase I've just described, and the second phase I sort of moved from that job of running this factory, which really was a family feeling, great factory, everybody together, amazing team, it really was great. And then moved from there into various next senior roles, both in the UK and in Germany. And again, that was just me, I guess, building confidence in my own leadership style. Because the truth is, imposter syndrome, I mean, I suffered imposter syndrome every day. And in many ways still do, because it was this, I feel like I am different to this sort of typical sort of, style of leadership that was getting on in the organization. And my style was different. The whole sort of persona about me felt different to a lot of other people around me in Siemens. So and there was this, am I really good enough to do this? Am I the right person to do this? So there was a lot of self-doubt in as I was, taking these various senior jobs. But the confidence rose, and as the confidence rose, I was sort of, I mean, there was never I'm going to come out now, but there was a moment where it was just becoming too uncomfortable because, you know, this double life thing just, you know, and by the way, people were beginning to know. I mean, you know, you can't, I would lived in Manchester by this time, you know, and you're hopping around on Canal Street and there's bound to be somebody who's working at Siemens who sees you, you know, so it wasn't comfortable. So I knew there was going to come a time, but also I think the real thing was there came a time where I said, do you know, I've just got to start doing something about helping change the culture around here, because the Siemens culture, albeit, you know, it had all the perfect work culture, you know, teamwork, agile, innovation, getting stuff done, quality, you know, all of that sort of stuff. I mean, amazing. But in terms of inclusion and in terms of sort of, you know, the best leadership styles, we were as bad as every large corporate or maybe even small engineering company. So I felt it was time I needed to start helping to change that.
So what point in the journey did that happen, and how was that received?
So about halfway through, so I think maybe probably 16, 17 years in, you know, it was, yeah, it was interesting, really. I mean, I would say it was 80%, you know, received quite positively. You know, with sort of 20%, you know, of the sorts of stupid behaviours you would expect, you know, and there is no question, you know, that even from some of my colleagues, you know, you sort of received, you know, quite sort of, you know, homophobic or, you know, not very nice remarks. But by this time, I'd sort of built confidence, so it was like I couldn't care less. You know, and I actually started getting a little bit brutal about, you know, wanting to change the culture. And then ultimately, you know, I really was able to do something about it when I was, you know, got the huge privilege of being asked to lead the company in the UK, which, gosh, I can't remember what year it was, but I ended up doing that job for about 6 years. And really, one of the first things I tackled was, you know, our whole sort of inclusion agenda. And I always remember, and by the way, I didn't plan this, but we were starting to push inclusion. We were doing, you know, putting more of the initiatives in and, you know, doing unconscious bias training and setting up women's networks and LGBT networks. You know, this is all very familiar territory now. Siemens weren't doing any of that. You know, we're talking sort of 10 or 12 years ago. And then we have these management forums, you know, 200 of your top managers in the room, and we were discussing inclusion, and I just decided, and we were also very much about storytelling. We'd got this new thing about, you know, you need to tell stories. And so I thought, you know, I'm just going to tell my story. So I just sort of from the podium, I just said, look, I'm just going to tell you my story. And I sort of, a little bit like this, told my story of having been closeted in Siemens, you know, having felt alpha males was the better way forward. And you know, and I told a few stories of, you know, sort of that were slightly more homophobic and that weren't particularly nice. And then at the end of it, I just asked the question, and I said, here's the real question. I'm not telling you this because, you know, I want any you know, form of sympathy from anybody. The reason why I'm telling the story is because I want to ask the question, and that is, if a young gay, lesbian, trans person joins our organisation today, do you think they'd feel different to me? And do you think that, you know, they would feel really comfortable to be themselves from day one? And that was the question that got everybody thinking. And people still talk about it, I know, in Siemens today. You know, a lot of people, I recently posted something on LinkedIn, and a lot of my Siemens colleagues pointed back to that moment as a moment that sort of started to change our culture seriously. Because, of course, the answer was, you know, we can't guarantee it. And as a matter of fact, I knew by this point that there were some people coming to me that were saying, by the way, I'm working for a boss who you know, says some quite homophobic things, and you know, and he was telling me this in the gay village, which was a bit uncomfortable. And so, you know, so it was obvious these issues were happening. And then look, and then we just really went for it. And when I say I was a bit brutal with it, you know, it literally was, you know, if you're not on this journey, you know, you're just not part of my leadership team. We are going to change Siemens. And actually, you know, to my surprise, the whole thing took off across, you know, Siemens globally. So Siemens Germany started learning from us. You know, and I mean, honestly, I mean, Siemens never sponsored any prides anywhere. Siemens sponsors prides everywhere now. I personally had a row with the head of global communications because he was adamant that Siemens couldn't sponsor Pride in Berlin because, you know, this would just damage our reputation. I won that fight. He left the organization. And you know, so it, you know, there was a bit of fight in this,
yeah, a bit of friction, yeah.
and a bit of friction. But hey, and you know, it was. I feel proud of it, and it was a good journey. And then I guess in some ways it was sort of what I wanted to achieve. You know, having to have lived the life I did through that Siemens. And please, I want to balance it. Siemens is an amazing organisation, but there was this one bit of culture that we needed to change.
Yeah, it's a big bit of culture. What a great legacy to leave there. I mean, you spent 17 years in the closet in that organisation. I'm sure it was a very well-engineered closet with, you know, excellent hinges.
It was always my strategy.
But now things are very different. You're, you know, an out gay leader, very much in the public eye. You know, I've seen you on Question Time and Newsnight, regularly writing pieces in the national press. What is that like now to do that kind of 180 and actually be visible and be out as a leader?
It's just a privilege and a pleasure, to be honest with you, you know, and I mean, at this stage in life, you could do one of two things, couldn't you? You know, you could just say, I've had an amazing career, which I have, and for which I feel hugely privileged and honoured to have had that chance, and just, you know, go and enjoy myself and sit on beaches and do some nice stuff, you know, or you use that privileged position that you've attained to try and help to continue to drive some change. And that's what drives me. Of course, I now don't, you know, have the opportunity to drive that within my own organisation. But you know, what is driving me at the moment, you know, is just the, you know, the sheer, well, you know, what polite? There is no polite word, you know. But where our country's dialogue has gone, and the attack we're having on so-called woke people, the attack we're having on particularly the trans community, but you know, just the overall narrative of our nation, you know, I think it's just gone so far in the wrong direction that, you know, I will do anything to help balance that. And the sort of role I've sort of, you know, tried to take in that is to really help, you know, bring business leaders into a position where business leaders, you know, are being much more supportive of the right behaviours in organisations, and quite frankly, also calling out, you know, government on their not so correct leadership. Yeah, so that's what I'm doing, and I'm doing that from various angles, one of which I have set up a little social enterprise called Vocal, VOCL, if you want to have a look at the website, and that is all about working with future leaders to help them be morally brave in the way in which they communicate, and to very much engage in responsible business. So it's a responsible business movement, purposeful business, exactly what you, Matt and Claire, are doing. We should get together and talk about that. But it's really helping next generation leaders sort of find their moral compass, and you know, and get out there and say what needs to be said. And, you know, and I'll just tell you a little story. I mean, I've just been, I went down to the Lib Dem Party conference. I've just come back from the Labour Party conference. I gave the Conservative one a wide berth. And I've been to the Conservative Party conference every year for years, you know, but I just honestly, I couldn't stomach it anymore. Am I being too political?
No, be more political. We're in good company here.
You know, but they have these business days. I'm sure some of you know. You've probably been there, and 200 business. Actually, at the Conservative Party conference, not as senior as they normally were this year. More of them were going to the Labour Party, where I've just been. But you know, all this stuff coming out about, you know, we're going to slow down net zero, we're going to cancel down some of HS2, you know, and then off the stage, you know, you get these absolute, I mean, you know, to have the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom putting into his speech off that stage, you know, that women can only be women and men can only be men. I mean, wasn't it disgraceful? I mean, it all makes you sick. You know, this is the Prime Minister of our country coming out with this, you know, just to appease a few of his... And by the way, I don't think he even believes it. You know, it's because he wants to appease the right wing in his party. But what he doesn't appreciate, you know, is the damage that is doing to, you know, our community at the end of the day. And maybe we'll get to, you know, what more we should do about that. But anyway, you know, so all of this stuff is going on. You know, there isn't a business person in the room. Well, there might be. There might be the odd hedge funder who agrees with some of this, but most people, any hedge funders in the room? You know, but you know, most people are not agreeing with this. In comes Prime Minister and Chancellor, not a word. Not a word about high speed 2, net zero, what's going on with all of this anti-woke stuff, you know. I mean, we like woke workplaces, don't we? I do. And, you know, and we have a problem in that regard. You know, and of course, these people then leave that and they say, oh, you know, well, you know, business are on side. Business believe we're doing the right thing here. And, you know, and we do have a real problem with that. And so, you know, that's a little bit why I'm an agitator. As a matter of fact, at the Labour Party event yesterday, I was called a practical agitator. I quite like that. I quite like that.
Sounds like a compliment.
But, you know, I'm doing it because at the end of the day, I think we've, you know, our narrative has gone in the wrong direction and we need to shift it in another direction. And I think business, you know, as well, of course, as, you know, great organisations like yours and conversations like this, you know, I think we have a responsibility to be louder and to say we're just not happy with this. Of course, we've all got our right to vote, but, you know, that just takes too long.
Yeah, I think that phrase moral courage is one that really sticks with me. I was lucky enough to go on a bit of a tour around the States, looking at various diversity and inclusion initiatives in large companies. I was actually there when Roe v. Wade was overturned and speaking to these horrified, you know, D&I kind of managers who were saying, we will pay money to fly our staff for that care, for, you know, gender affirmative care, for abortion care, whatever it is, but we will not make any public statements because we just don't want to rock the boat. We're just too afraid of the environment at the moment, and yeah, just a real kind of a lack of that moral courage, I guess.
But the UK never used to be like that. You know, that's what has gone wrong. You know, which is that, you know, when I was chief executive of Siemens, you know, I mean, honestly, I mean, look, these might not be our favourite characters either, you know, but I did have a pretty good relationship with David Cameron and George Osborne and quite a lot of his cabinet, you know, and I never felt like I couldn't tell them the truth. You know, and we disagreed on many things. I mean, clearly I disagreed with their decision. Well, it was actually more David Cameron's decision than George Osborne's, you know, but his decision that he wanted to call a referendum on the European Union. You know, I was in the room when he announced that to the business communion, you know, and I told him, I said, you're mad. You know, and we were able to have those conversations, whereas, you know, that whole dialogue has gone, you know, and if you're not agreeing with me, you're sort of not invited into the room anymore, and you know, and of course it's now gone even further, you know, that you're trying to curtail the right of people, you know, who don't have my privilege and my platform, you know, whose only privilege and platform is to go out onto the streets and protest, and we're even trying to curtail that, and which I think is totally wrong.
By the way, they're on conferences.
You know, and in the 1980s, I was out there protesting against Section 28. You know, I mean, you know, and I think we, you know, we need to do these things when we're fighting for our rights.
Absolutely, yeah. So that leads us neatly on to sort of, you know, what what do we do about that? How do we fix it all? If you could just a couple of minutes on that would be great. You've talked there about the role of business leaders, and there's many business leaders in this room here tonight, and invite us to reflect on kind of having that moral courage.
Yeah.
What other kind of practical?
The answer is, of course, so this is a
agitations.
hugely complex problem. By the way, we all know, we're not the only country experiencing this. Populism has sort of taken over, and that's really what it is we're talking about. And this is again what I find so frustrating. And actually we haven't, it's pride in leadership. We actually haven't talked much about leadership, but to me leadership, is all about moral courage, strong values, and sticking up for the right things. And the minute a leader, sort of says, well, look, I don't really think that we should be slowing down net zero or cancelling HS2, but I think it might win me a few votes in the red wall seats, and you change your leadership position based on that. Well, that's it. You're not a leader in my books, and that's why, if anybody says to me Rishi Sunak is all right, really, he's not all right. A, because of what he said on trans issues, but B, because he's got absolutely no moral courage and leadership or principles on these things, and don't even get me on to Boris Johnson. Somehow we've got to bring leadership and moral courage back into politics, which is actually quite hard to do because, being in politics, for all of my criticism of them, is also not very easy. I've been asked whether I want to go into politics, and look, it's not easy, if especially you end up in senior politics, and then you've got, the media outside your drive, and that's not exactly what everybody wants, but somehow we've got to find a way of getting that leadership better. Second, I do think business has a much, much stronger role to play. And I really, really question, why we as a business community, aren't out there particularly challenging, the whole, woke agenda, the whole agenda that's happening on immigration, and of course immigration always mixed up with refugees, and and business ought to be really, really pushing back at that. And here, when people say to me, why are you so woke, and why do you always go so left on this, I say, look, it's a really easy answer, which is that if I go too woke, and we do get a bit too woke sometimes, don't we? We can, there's no question about that, but you're never going to really upset anybody, right? You're always going to be on the safe side if you, basically are speaking up and helping the more minority and the less represented groups. And that's always my principle. And it doesn't, and I'm not just talking here now about the LGBT community, it's whatever underrepresented group. So always go on the safe side. Whereas if you go on the other side, the risk of you upsetting people is massive. And of course, and that's exactly what they're doing all the time. And I genuinely can't get my head around, why anybody thinks that sort of dividing people and, being racist, homophobic, transphobic, creates for a better society. And, and therefore, I just wish that business leaders were a little bit more vocal about that, but also about broader, policy matters. And then my final point of how to fix it is I genuinely think we in this country, particularly actually, we've just got far too complacent. Life has got a bit too cool and good and all the rest of it, and and we're just not paying enough attention to politics and getting out and voting and making our voice heard, going out and protesting, quite frankly, and making it clear in what we believe in our society. And ultimately, I think if we did that more and more, and if we used our vote more, I think there could be a way in which we could turn our political system into proportional representation. And that's the other thing. I'm a huge fan of bringing in a more representative form of politics, and that would be my dream. My dream would be, that we could end up in a situation where actually we need, so there is some form, Labour don't quite get a full majority. They need the Lib Dems to prop them up, and ultimately, that leads to some debate about ultimately ending in a proportional representation type system. Because my experience is that, the other two countries I know very well, Austria and Germany, both of them have their right-wing movements you know, quite strong actually, but it's always kept under control because actually they'd sit in Parliament. And you know, so in Germany you have the AfD, you know, and they sit in Parliament, and so therefore they're scrutinised like everybody else, you know. Whereas here, you know, we allow the Nigel Farages you know, to parade and do their horrible stuff, you know, without having any mandate at all. I'm getting too political, aren't I?
It's absolutely fine. I don't think you're going to get much disagreement from this crowd, to be honest. But we do have Nigel Farage speaking next. No, we don't. So I think that's probably a good time to open it up for questions. So yeah, does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask? Yeah, Vicky.
Could I ask, every corporate now has an ED&I programme, you know, it's very much in vogue. What would you like to see those programmes do?
Well, I mean, I'll sort of give a balanced answer to that, which is that, you know, I think even 10 years ago, you know, most of those programs, whether it's EDI or ESG actually, you know, most of those programs were probably, you know, slightly paid on lip service and you know, and not really represented at the boardroom. So I mean, so you know, and I think there has been quite a strong shift in a much better direction. So I say, you know, we keep on, you know, absolutely on that journey, and ultimately, what I'd like the you know, the diversity and inclusion programs is just for them to become, you know, the sort of the lifeblood of an organisation rather than a program that sort of sits as a bit of an appendix. And again, you know, I'm not trying to paint here that we got it all right at Siemens. We didn't, but you know, but in the end, we managed to shift our, you know, inclusion program, you know, not just to be an inclusion program because, you know, it was the responsible and the right thing to do for our communities, but actually this is what drove our innovation. You know, this is what really made us a better company, and so you move it into you know, a strategic position. And today that's actually a lot easier to do because every company is struggling for skills. And again, a story I used to tell to my, you know, senior leadership team at Siemens, I say, look, we're struggling for skills like everybody else, and actually we're fishing in a pond of 30% of the population. You know, because we're not being particularly, you know, attractive for women to come and work in our organisation. You know, we're not attractive to the LGBT community. We're not attractive to people from other less represented backgrounds, and we were doing a damn awful job at attracting people with disabilities into our organisation. Not great, is it? You know, and that just made it sort of really obvious that, you know, if we're going to employ more people, we've just got to make sure we're really recruiting representatively across those. And again, you know, we made a lot of effort to do that. So yeah, centre of the strategy.
Thanks. Yes.
Why do you think business leaders right now aren't as vocal about representation? Do you think it's because there's so much emphasis placed on brand management, social media, you don't want to rock the boat, get bad press, bad engagement from what is essentially a vocal minority? Is it because people in leadership roles don't have much, you know, of a diverse background, so maybe they don't place as much personal importance? Do you think they are sympathetic and they think that the circus will eventually lead down?
So why are business leaders not more vocal on these issues?
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, I think you've drawn the conclusions right. I mean, I think there's a couple of things that are particularly strong in the list that you've just brought out, and one is, and there probably is quite a few of you here who are working in sort of comms or PR or government affairs type role, and I do think that they play a role that is far too protective. You know, so, you know, I obviously had an ambition to be a bit more of an outspoken leader, and honestly, I I did manage to change the culture in this quite a bit, but, every time I went to do an interview, whether it was on Radio 4 or whatever, I'd get 10 pages of what I can't say, and half a page of what my messages are, and so if that's what you're giving to a leader, you're always going to get a pretty sort of, oh gosh, I can't say anything. And that's why, and actually a lot of business leaders, when they do make it onto Radio 4, they're pretty bland and pretty awful. And again, and this is what vocal is all about. It's, how can you be your authentic self, and still try and manage that sort of, brand issue. So I do think that PR comms organisation. There's a great Manchester organisation called Comms Rebel. I don't know whether anybody's heard of that, run by a woman called Advita Patel. She's absolutely amazing, and she's sort of got a real thing to try and help change that a little bit within the comms and PR industry. So I think that's one thing, and I think a second thing is as business leaders, it's never something you get trained on. You're sort of trained on how to do your job, how to make your profit, how to get your sales, and all of that. But nobody gives you any training, on how to live your moral courage and, and how to be a socially responsible leader. I mean, it's not quite true. There is some sort of social responsibility stuff, now in business management courses. I've got to say that because Malcolm Press is in the room. So there is some of it creeping in, but, that real sort of communicating your authentic self, I think there's a lot more work to do on that. And then there is a final thing which you didn't mention, which is that leaders are really scared of sort of, wanting to appear to be, we're doing all of this and it's great, and then, you get caught in the media for not having done the right thing. Again, I don't think that's a good enough excuse, because look, at Siemens we did loads of things wrong. And there's a way of dealing with that, which is you just go on the radio and you say, I'm dreadfully sorry, I'm mortified that this happened in my organisation. I am mortified, and I'm going to damn well sort it out. I mean, what's wrong with that? But but business leaders, somehow struggle with it.
Yes.
You talked earlier about getting Siemens to sponsor Burning Pride. Now, my question for you is, there's so much commercialisation with Pride, and it's becoming a bit of a problem from my point of view, because it feels so insincere with a lot of companies. Now, what do you think is the best approach that a company should take to sponsoring a Pride event in terms of their attitudes towards it, and how they do it, and when it's right to do that?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, especially some of the stories we had around Manchester Pride and London Pride. Look, I think I've got a fairly simple answer to that, and that is that as long as your purpose of sponsoring those things is crystal clear that you are doing that in support of the community and inclusion both within your organisation and outside, and that is truly your purpose, then do it and take the flak. And there will, back to my earlier point. If your purpose is, I'm going to use this to brand, and this is, I think, where organisations have got them. So, and they stand down the Pride, can I sign you up to my new Barclays account, and now you're on the wrong side of what your intent is. So, and then, and I think that's really what has happened. There has been some people who have exploited the brand for obvious commercial gain, and they get caught out. But I think it would be a shame if now everybody says, we don't want Pride sponsorship money, etc., because commercial money does help. And it's maybe less of an issue for Manchester, but actually at Siemens in UK, we actually started sponsoring Pride in Lincoln, where we had big factories, Pride in Newcastle, and they were hugely grateful for getting, a few £1,000s to help them put on a better Pride for them. Why wouldn't you want to do that?
Yes.
I think the former CEO of Disney wrote a book earlier this year. He talked about the gay glass ceiling. But I think there's no FTSE 100 CEOs, and there's about 4 in the Fortune 500. And I guess the question there was almost, we've got the corporate policies that allow people to be themselves,
there's a bit of a grey space when you get to the C-suite in terms of being accepted in, and I just wonder whether you feel that actually does exist in terms of it's you know, favours people who might have kids and families who can come together and have wives and round for dinner, etc. I just wondered whether that's what they were talking about in certain ways of a gay glass ceiling in terms of access. So you've got the corporate policies, which are great, but actually to penetrate through that to the C-suite, is there something there that we still need to crack?
It's a really interesting question, that, and I mean the answer is there is a little bit of that, but I don't think it's actually based on prejudice of who we are. You know, I think that's purely because, you know, so yes, you know, I was in this privileged circle of CEOs in the UK, and you know, and you'd get invited to number 10 and do all of this stuff, you know, and you would get invited to, you know, barbecues at George Osborne's and whatever, you know, and I never went along to those things, but I didn't go along to them because, you know, I didn't feel I was invited. I was invited. I just didn't want to go along because, quite frankly, I thought they'd be terribly boring. And you know, and I sort of want to spend my private life, you know, doing the things that I enjoy doing, and I don't have enough time for my private life as it is. So I think from that point, maybe we even exclude ourselves a little bit, you know, because look, you know, I mean, you know, that's what, you know, more straight families do, and they have their barbecues and the kids are there and all the rest of it, you know, and then they talk about the next shoot they're going on. I did go along to one or two just to see what it was like, you know, and that's literally what they talk about, what shoot they're going on. I'm like, oh God, you know, not really my sort of thing. So I think there is a little bit of that, but I genuinely never felt that, you know, I've never felt in that sort of group that as a gay out CEO I was in any way excluded. As a matter of fact, I would say that I, you know, by this time I've gained all of my confidence. I would say that I used my difference to sort of make me a little bit interesting, actually. You know, I think people genuinely found me quite interesting because, you know, I was different, and, you know, and I was displaying my sort of leadership style quite obviously different. You know, I was one of the first CEOs to go into a meeting with the Prime Minister with their ties off. I know these are little things, you know, but it's like, oh God, you dare do that, you know. But, you know, and I sort of displayed my difference in various ways. So I think we can use it, you know, we get enough disadvantage, so why don't we just use a bit of advantage sometimes?
So Lincoln Pride, yes. George Osborne barbecue, no. Got it. Yes.
I didn't get invited to his wedding, by the way.
Thank you so much for the discussion. And it comes like my question links very much to Chris's, which is if you were to design an open access free course for LGBT leadership, what would you put in it?
My goodness. I think that's one for us to get together on and design, you know. But I think, you know, I think maybe the title of it would be something about, you know, using our difference, you know, and that is, you know, because that is what I failed to do for 15 years in Siemens, or even a little bit more, and I absolutely came into my own, you know, when I was, you know, who I was, and used my moral courage, you know, my different experiences of, you know, what we talked a little bit about that, you know, but my goodness, you know, there aren't that many people who end up in, you know, very senior leadership position who have some of our lives, you know. You know, and that's why I love our community, by the way. You know, I really love our community because, you know, you know, when you're out socialising, you're out at parties and canals, wherever you are, you know, it's all ages, it's everybody, you know, and we have quite a unique, you know, look in on society sometimes. So it's how can we use that difference to drive a difference. But I haven't written the chapters yet.
Well, I think that's a great note for us to end on. So if you could all join me in helping thank the morally courageous and practically agitating Juergen Maier, please.